Ever. All right. Greetings, everybody in attendance this Friday afternoon. Welcome to our first legislative forum for 2025. I am Joseph Tart, County Parks Director at Chisago County. I'm also the Vice Chair representing District 4. For today's forum, we would like to introduce Elizabeth Wefel. She's attorney and lobbyist at Flaherty and Hood. She assists the Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails with Parks and Trails advocacy work. Today, she will probably be discussing all the current legislative developments concerning our priorities. So please welcome Elizabeth.
Thank you for that kind introduction. And I apologize in advance, like my camera's kind of screwy. So if I'm not looking at you when I'm speaking, it's because I'm not entirely sure where to look. So, but thank you. I have, honestly, when I've done these in the past, I haven't always used PowerPoint, but there is so much chaos going on right now. I thought the only way I could keep myself on track was to use a PowerPoint. So apologies about that, but hopefully you can see it and see me. So, today we started doing this a couple years ago. It's we're trying to do monthly forums on the legislative session. This is our first one, kind of update you in terms of what's going on in the session. Our agenda for today is a few items. One, I'm just going to talk about our advocacy generally and sort of the role that you as members play in that. The second thing we're going to do is preview the legislative session generally, sort of what's going on here in St. Paul. The third is to talk about our legislative agenda, and then finally to talk about what's next and how you can help in that work. I do want to say that throughout the presentation, even though I'm doing this with a PowerPoint, I want you to feel free to raise questions. You can put them in the chat or raise your hand. And if I don't notice them, Brad will, I'm sure, kindly sort of tell me, because again, I'm kind of like looking in an odd direction here. But I do want this to be a conversation, so feel free to interrupt me as we go along, as long as you're nice about it. I'm kidding. Okay, legislative advocacy and your role. As many of you, but perhaps not all of you know, at its core, Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails was founded to advocate for parks and trails of Greater Minnesota. And that means both regional and local parks and trails. And so it's very much, it's not the only thing we do, but we had a board retreat in December. And one of the things that we discussed is that it really is sort of the core of our mission. And it's something we always need to remind ourselves that this is why we exist. And so again, that's partly why we do the forum. It's partly why they have me, the lobbyist, up here in St. Paul, but it's a very important part of what we do. Did we just lose the screen share? Are we okay? Okay. So one thing I want to just remind folks is that legislative advocacy, which is also known as lobbying, is a team sport. I'm the lead down here in St. Paul at the legislature. It is very hard for folks, like yourselves, who are either, city or county parks directors or city or county staff or commissioners or city councilors to be here all the time, or to keep track of what's going on. And that's why organizations like GMPT have a lobbyist like me to be down there. I've got the relationships with legislators. I mostly understand what's going on down here and can kind of keep track of things and move things forward. We have our board and our executive team that really help drive the ship with our legislative policies and agendas, sort of the guide stone for what we're doing. At the end of the day, I am not at the legislature pushing my agenda. I am pushing the interests and desires of our organization. And the best way for me to do that, we adapt a legislative agenda in October. And then throughout the year, as questions arise, I will consult with the board and the executive team on things that we need to address as we go along. And then finally, again, where you all come in is that our members really play a crucial role as voices, both to your own legislators and to other key legislators. Now, I can tell you that, I'm going to be at the Capitol on Tuesday, on Wednesday, and I talk to a lot of legislators. I've got Renee down here. Sometimes, she does the same thing. And the thing is that it's really great to hear from me. It's even better, honestly, when legislators hear from you. And so that's why I say it really is a team sport, all of us working together to achieve our goals. So I'm going to talk before we jump into our actual legislative agenda. I actually have done for the past for our organization an entire presentation on how to lobby. We sort of pull that off and dust it off every couple of years. We'll be doing more of that at our upcoming legislative action day. But a few reminders as we head into the legislative session. The first is that at the legislature, as in much of life, strong relationships are the foundation for success. And that's something to keep in mind as we go along. And what that means is that it's really important that, if you're going to be talking to your legislators, it's better that they know who you are before you have to ask something. And I get it. Sometimes it's not always easy to do when you're not going to meet them. But let me tell you, it's a lot easier to call your legislator up if you've built a relationship with them and say, hey, I'm very concerned about this bill that's popped up. And you remember that park in our district? This could have a real impact on them. So getting to know them before you need to ask for something is always sort of a key goal that we should all have in mind. And so I would say over the next month or two, maybe a goal for everyone is, to get them to know you by name, or maybe by face, or maybe by the place that you work at. And that can take some time, but again, it's something that, help us help you do that. Now, you may be asking yourself, Liz, I'm a park director. How do I do this? So a couple different ways I'm going to walk you through, how you can build that relationship. First, introduce yourself. Who are you in your position? Maybe it's stopping by, maybe it's calling or sending an email. I always think, especially this is probably more important closer to the election, but congratulate them on winning their election or re-election. Then the best thing to do is try and meet with them. And that can happen in a number of different ways. You can ask for a meeting, whether a formal or informal meeting. Sometimes legislators will hold in-district office hours at a coffee shop or, maybe their own office. Stop by if that opportunity is available for you. Another important thing to do is stop by town halls if they hold them. Other things that you can do, invite them to a park board meeting or a similar gathering. If you're doing a ribbon cutting, something like that, they love that kind of stuff. Invite your legislators. Another great idea is to arrange a tour or visit to, this should say city or county facility, but include them at your openings, other things. Also, if they're doing anything for you, a really great way to get to build a relationship is to recognize their work and their contributions publicly, saying out loud, thank you, for legislator X, Z, or Y that you helped get us this funding for this park. That kind of thing goes a long way in long-term relationship building. When you're in St. Paul, try to stop by your legislator's office and leave a note. If they're not there, if they are there, ask if you can talk to them. The one caveat I need to say is that it's going to be very chaotic over the next 2 years for your legislators in the House of Representatives. If you've been down to the Capitol before, you know that they are the House legislators are housed when they're not on the Capitol floor in a building called the State Office Building. Well, that State Office Building, which is actually, if you could see through my windows, you could see the construction. It's back over there. But that is being reconstructed. And so the House of Representatives, those members are not going to be in their offices until at least 2027. They are down here and they will be housed in what's called the Centennial Office Building. It's going to be a lot more complicated. It used to be that when you were stopping by the State Office Building, you could kind of wander around, again, stop at their desk and say hi. You're not going to be able to do it over there. If you want to see your House representative, you will need to call or email ahead of time. So just something to keep in mind. And then all of those tips I just gave you, repeat when you can. Schedule regular get-togethers, and you might need to do that with others in your city or county, but it's important to do because these relationships take time and persistence to build. So, is there any questions before I move on to the next section? Okay, now the fun stuff. Well, the legislative session starts next Tuesday, January 14th. This is what we would like to see. Everybody high-fiving, getting along, getting the work done. This is what we're probably gonna see. People butting heads, getting their horns locked. And I'm gonna just dive in and explain why. And it's funny, I made these slides this morning. Between the time I made these slides and now, I just found out, I don't want to say there's a mistake, but there's a potential change. Things have been a little crazy up here. So let's start with what I thought was going to be the more challenging body, but might be the easier body, the Minnesota Senate. Some of you may have heard that former Senator and former Senate Majority Leader Carrie Dietzig passed away in late December. She was suffering from ovarian cancer. It happened fast, moved quickly. She was an amazing legislator, came from a family with a long time history in Minnesota politics. And, she was very well regarded. People, always recognized her ability to really reach across the aisle. I mean, she was a Democrat, but worked hard to try and work with everyone. And it was honestly just a big loss to Minnesota, her passing away. What that means for the Senate, though, is the Senate typically has 67 members. Until someone new is elected, however, that means the Senate is tied at 33 DFL members and 33 GOP members until the winner of a January 28th special election is sworn in, which can take up to a week later. And so going into the session, they don't have a majority for either body right now. There's a further complication. Some of you may have seen pictures of the woman also on the slide, and that is Senator Nicole Mitchell from Woodbury. Last Easter break, some of you may remember, she decided to take a trip up to Detroit Lakes, and allegedly, we say allegedly because the crime has not been resolved, broke into her stepmother, her dad's basic widow, her house, and allegedly tried to burglarize. And so she has been brought up on criminal charges. And it makes it interesting. And so one comment I will make on that is that right now her trial is scheduled for January 27th, which is, 2 weeks from now. It is one day before that special election. Literally minutes before I started on this, like I said, some new news came across, and her lawyer has asked that the trial be postponed until May. I don't know whether that will happen, but again, it changes the dynamics. What we saw last spring was that there was a real push by some folks in the legislature to try and expel her. Ultimately, the DFL said, everyone deserves their day in court, guilty or innocent until proven guilty, so they weren't willing to do that. I don't think anybody expected that it would get dragged out this long, but it's still there. And so I don't, honestly, if the trial moves till May, I don't know how that affects things. But putting even that aside, starting on January 14th, neither party has a majority going into the legislative session. And it's our understanding that right now, both the leaders of the GOP and the DFL are discussing at least a temporary power sharing agreement between the parties. And that's one reason, one thing I know the board has asked for, I've had members ask for, like, where's our updated committee list? We don't have a committee list yet. We keep expecting one, but with all of these changes and turns and events, we don't have it yet. The one thing I do expect, although until I get the formal list in my little hands, we do expect the same chair for Environment and Legacy. Unlike the House, the Senate put the Environment Committee and the Legacy Committee, which are the two we most care about, into the same committee that is chaired by Senator Fwang He of St. Paul. The next thing, oh my God, Minnesota House. And what's really funny, at least to me, I work down here. We are constantly watching the news. We are constantly talking to legislators, constantly talking to other lobbyists. And so to us, this is one of the biggest things occupying our mind. I was talking this morning to my physical therapist. He had no idea what was going on. And so you may or may not have heard about this controversy. I've been surprised at the number of my friends who have not heard about it. But there is a raging controversy over who is going to be controlling the House of Representatives for the next 2 years. And so I'm going to back up to the November election. In November, Curtis Johnson, he's a gentleman right here, lives somewhere in Roseville or Little Canada, somewhere near there. He was elected to the House 40B seat. At the time, election day, the House was tied at 67-67 for each party. I think this is the second time since we've had parties in Minnesota that we saw a tie in power. So then the question becomes, what do we do? So the leaders of the GOP and the leaders of the DFL started working together on how can we do this. They announced a power sharing agreement that gave equal control of the committees and the leadership at the House to both parties. As Representative Hortman was going to be the Speaker of the House. They had a different title for Lisa Damuth. Both parties would consult with each other on agendas. The committees would be co-chaired by a Republican and a Democrat. So everything was kind of leading up to that. All of a sudden, a lawsuit was filed against Sir Curtis Johnson, against this gentleman. And a judge ruled in late December that he could not assume his seat because he does not live in his district. He lived close to his district, and in fact, that had been his district until redistricting in 2020 or 2022. But he doesn't live there now. He had rented an apartment in the new district, and it was an open seat. So I think he probably knew he was going to win. It's a pretty DFL seat, but he didn't live there. And if you don't live in your district for 6 months before the election, you can't hold the seat. So the judge said you cannot represent this district. Governor Walz, right at the end of December, called for a special election that has been set for January 28th. It is widely anticipated that the seat will likely go to the Democrats. It is a very Democratic region, has been represented by the DFL for decades. The one interesting twist there is that the GOP has sued to postpone this election. I'm not going to bore you all with the details of the grounds for their suit. I have read the underlying law, and I guess my 10-second take on it is that the law can be read in a number of different ways. Courts really don't like to interfere with what the legislature or the governor is doing, so my instinct is that they're not going to move that, but a lot of strange things have been happening, so who knows? But what this means is that starting on opening day next week, the GOP has what they are describing as an operational majority. It's not a true majority, but it's an operational majority because, there are 30, there should be 134 elected members. There's only 133 elected members right now. And they hold 67 of those seats. What they have announced they plan to do is that they will use that operational majority to elect the speaker on the first day and to set committees in a way. They're not going to adopt the power sharing agreement, but what they are going to do is adopt committees that would basically have at least one, if not more, GOP members than there are DFL members, and there would be no co-chairs. The DFL has said, hey, wait a minute, we're going to be back to full strength on January 28th. You know it. So we would ask for you to continue the power sharing agreement. And if you don't continue the power sharing agreement, we're not going to show up on January 14th, and you won't be able to elect a speaker. And again, I'm not gonna opine on which one of these folks is right or wrong. I think that arguments can be made in good faith on both sides. But the question sort of that is out there right now is, do 67 legislators constitute a quorum to transact business on January 14th? Because when you elect a speaker, which is sort of the triggering event to do everything else like setting up committees, you need a quorum. So the question is, do you need 67 legislators? And if so, the GOP has a quorum, or do you need 68? And if you need 68, then they need at least one Democrat to show up. I'm going to be honest, I have no idea what's going to happen on Tuesday. I kind of wish that the two sides could come together and agree on something, but that's just, one opinion. But why does this matter? Why are they fighting so hard on this? Picture of the other gentleman here on the bottom. Right now there is a second court challenge, and quite frankly, everyone is like constantly watching their emails and their phones and their texts right now to see, if the decision has come out. But Brad Tapke, he is a legislator. I think this will be his third full term. He had been elected and then got knocked out in an election, came back, won his seat again in 2022, ran for it again in 2024. He lives in what I would describe as a truly purple district that has almost equally balanced Democrats and Republicans, and he won by a 14-vote margin. However, as they were, filing and doing all the election work afterwards, it was discovered that Scott County had inadvertently thrown 20 ballots away, and this was done in a very heavily Democratic precinct. And so the question is whether or not they need to redo the election. We're waiting for a verdict. The GOP has said that they're not going to seat him regardless of what the judge says. They can only do that, however, if they have a majority for the quorum. So there's lots of open questions about what's going on, who's controlling the legislature. So I have no idea what my job's going to be looking like next week. It's just going to be very complicated. So that's what's going on at the House. I'm going to move on to our policies and agendas, but does anyone have any questions about this material before I move on to the next section? Y'all are a quiet bunch today. Okay, next, let's talk about what Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails are doing. So the GMPT every fall at our annual meeting, we adopt legislative policies and a legislative agenda. Our policies guide our work at the Capitol. Our policies are really focused on, some simple principles like ensuring that we have our fair share of funding for regional and local parks and trails, that we are supporting the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks Commission and their ability, and that they are also supporting our members and their parks and trails. That the legislature does not place undue burdens on our ability to build parks and trails. All really important principles that kind of guide how we react. And we have some of those principles because I'll be honest, there is always every session, sort of a bill introduced by someone else that we haven't really thought of. And so it's really important to have those sort of as a guidance for how we respond. And when I see those, what I do is I bring them to, depending upon how much time I have, I either bring them to the board or bring them to the executive committee to kind of make sure that we're all in the same place in terms of how we're responding. But some of the efforts we've seen in the past, and we might see again this year, is we've seen efforts to block funding for any park or trail that has used eminent domain in the past. We've seen efforts at restricting the price at which land can be purchased. That should be purchased, not built. But we've also seen efforts to block any use of eminent domain whatsoever. There's other policy issues we've seen, restrictions on certain types of trails, things like that. So we are always watching those and, respond accordingly. There's also our legislative agenda, and I'm going to get a little more in depth on that. That guides the specific issues that we will be working on. I do want to say we have five things on our legislative agenda. We're going to be introducing bills on some, but not all of these issues. These are things that we would like to focus on. 5 is an aggressive agenda, and so I'll be honest, that's why we're not introducing every single one in a bill, but we will be pushing on all of them. But our legislative agenda this year, first thing is that we support legislation that ties reimbursement of state grant administration fees to the work actually performed by the state agency. That's a lot of words, but basically it has to do with sort of how the 20% of the legacy funding that we get, how much of that we actually get to spend on projects and how much of that goes to sort of behind the scenes at another agency to help do some of that work. The details I don't need to get into, but it will be part of legislation that we're working on. We also support legislation. There are many of you have had grants, and you know that you can't always get everything done in time. You can't always get the supplies. You can't always get, the land tied down right away. So we were also supporting legislation that will allow some of the unspent money to continue forward and either extend the projects or reallocate it to other projects. We are also going to make another push at using the general fund appropriation to pay for the operating costs of the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission. The reason we care about this, the commission does great work. They are very, very important partners of the Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails. But the challenge is that their budget is paid for out of our 20% of legacy. And, that's a chunk of change. We absolutely think that they need to receive funding. We think it should be coming out of the general fund. I'm going to be honest, this is going to be a really, really hard push this year. We are looking at a potential budget deficit in the out years, so the willingness to spend on new items is not going to be great. But you don't get what you don't ask for, so it still is an important priority for us. Another important priority for us is the Legislative Citizens Commission on Minnesota Resources. You may know that as the LCCMR, but that is a bill that spends the money out of the Environmental Natural Resources Trust Fund. And it is an important source of funding for local parks and trails grants. And that's why we always pay attention and get involved on the LCCMR. We also have a number of our members that have funding for a variety of projects in there. So getting that passed is really important. And then the final thing is a we support getting a bonding bill done that has money for local and regional grant programs that are administered through the DNR. Again, like the general fund appropriation, this is a hard push. You got to ask for it, but I'll be honest. Again, with just a variety of financial issues at the legislature, and this is going to be a hard one, but you don't get what you don't ask for. So how does this all translate into actual legislation? Well, a couple different things. We have two bills that we'll be working on, and we're working on them jointly with the commission. And the first is to make sure that we get 20% of our legacy funds. It is, they reappropriate the legacy funds every year. We almost think of the 20% as our sort of, set in statute. It's not. We've tried to set it in statute, and that was not successful. So we are working on the 20% being dedicated to, making sure we get that, and then also addressing the fee issue with the DNR. The second thing, again, is to pay for the commission funding out of the general fund. Other legislation that we'll be working on, but probably not introducing a bill, will be supporting passage of the LCCMR bill. That includes that funding for local grants and member projects, as well as supporting inclusion of local parks and trails grants in the final bonding bill. And with those, again, we're just getting started. Stay tuned, and we'll have bill numbers, handouts, and more available by the end of the month. Bill numbers are not assigned until the legislature starts, and as mentioned, I'm not exactly sure when all the work is going to be starting, so it's going to be fun. Gonna be fun. What's next for you? Like I said, take this time, get to know your legislators. Sign up for Legislative Action Day. You clearly got all the sign up details for this. Same email tells you how to make sign up for Legislative Action Day. If you are going to be coming down in person, I urge you, starting today or maybe next week, reach out to your legislator's assistant and try to get an appointment with them so you can go talk to them. Usually, it's a good idea to do that ahead of time. Then I urge you to read our monthly newsletters. Clearly, you guys you're here. It means you've been reading what we've been sending you. So I urge you to continue to read the newsletter, and we will be sending out legislative updates between newsletters during the session. Read those to know what's going on. In those, I will be doing things like making sure that if you have copies of handouts, so that if you're not able to come to Legislative Action Day, but you're talking to your legislators, you can use those as a reference point. I have copies of our legislative agenda on the website. Once the committees are actually firmed up, we'll share that information with you as well. So watch those, kind of keep up on things that way. I'd also urge you, let us know what you're hearing. Sometimes our members hear about controversies before we do. And one other thing I should have put on the slide is that, one of the best ways, to persuade, and one of the things we like to use at the legislature is stories. And so, right now we're pulling together our handouts and things like that. But, if you have, like a great park or trail that's been, funded through local parks and trails grants, through legacy, let us know about it. There's going to be policy questions that come up during the legislative session. And, when we ask you for input, let us know what you're hearing. Give us examples of what you see. That's really helpful. And then I would urge you to, again, not only join us for the Legislative Action Day, but we're going to do another similar forum a month from now. It will be different from our Legislative Action Day again. It probably won't be quite as long as this one, but we'll be getting into the kind of nuts and bolts of what's going on at the legislative session. So that's all my prepared remarks. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And kind of turn to all of you and see if you have questions or comments or thoughts. It's like a blank screen. I don't see anybody's faces besides Brad's and Glenda's. Anybody? Are you out there? What do you think? Brad, do you have any questions?
I don't off the top of my head, just because you covered a lot of what I was kind of expecting you to cover. There's nothing in the chat.
Okay.
Carlin just popped on. She might have something that looks like brewing in her head.
No, I was just giving you a face to look at.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Carlin and Glenda.
Elizabeth, this is Mike.
Yes.
So
Hey,
nice
Mike.
job again. You do this well every year for us. I really do appreciate the information shared. So nice job.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else questions? If not, Hey, Renee, there's Renee.
Well, I do have a question. I know you probably can't answer it, but let's speculate. So session opens on Tuesday and we don't have firm committees in the Senate yet. Are they going to open with no confirmed committee structure?
So
Ditto for House? I
Okay,
mean, we
we're gonna
have
take-
at least, we have House committees and I'm getting them all the information we're required to, but I'm assuming that that's going to change.
I'm gonna answer those separately.
Okay.
With the Senate, so I was talking to several, all I've been doing, I swear to God, this week is going to fundraisers for both parties. And so I was talking to some senators last night and according to them, there is a committee list. It just hasn't been shared publicly because I think there's still a few minor details that are being ironed out. Again, there's more of an effort to do some power sharing, so I think they're going to be finalizing those details. I am pretty confident that we will have the list by Monday and that you may see committees actually scheduled and having hearings as soon as next week in the Senate. So we know we think that that will be happening. I mean, no guarantee. And some of these legislators were surprised that we hadn't seen a list of committees yet. But I think, I think they're also trying to figure out, because they've got that seat, the special election happens on the 28th. And the person that replaces Carrie Dietzig, so Senator Dietzig had actually chaired the state government, state and local government operations committee. They're not going to have a new freshman chair that committee. New freshmen never chair committees, especially one as big as that. And so the question will become, where does the new person go? How are they backfilling that? So I think there's some thought being given to that. They fully expect, again, that Carrie will be replaced by a Democrat because it is Northeast Minneapolis. So I think that's why we're seeing some of the delay. Is that both the power sharing and the just not knowing who's going to be in there. But I'm pretty confident we'll have that next week. I know legislators are already, I wouldn't be surprised if we started seeing committee notices on Monday. With the House, the Democrats and the Republicans disagree with each other on whether or not there is a sufficient quorum. And basically, the House gets gavelled in on Tuesday by Secretary of State Steve Simon. And I'll add, I've known Steve for a long time, probably 20 years, long before I even became a lobbyist, because he was college roommates with a colleague of mine. And he's a pretty by the book guy, and also doesn't like to interject himself into controversies, but he's kind of found himself in one. And the situation, at least what he has advised, is that his nonpartisan researchers have told him that to have a quorum for electing a speaker, they need 68 people. And so that would mean that they would need at least one Democrat to show up and participate to elect a speaker. And if they don't elect a speaker, they don't have committees. And so I think it's really up in the air what's going to happen. And I really, like I said, I really hope they can come together and work out a solution, because this sort of, again, I'm not going to pick a side here. I think they need to work together. But if they don't work together, I honestly don't know what's going to happen Tuesday. Because even though, again, that's what Steve Simon is saying, is Steve Simon has also said, if you can show sort of, legal research, case and precedent that would suggest that that is not the way it should go, will absolutely look at it. So, but his sort of, advance when he's advised is that he does not think they will have quorum on Tuesday. So does that mean the Democrats are going to show up or not show up? We don't know. The other thing we don't know is, even if he rules there's not a quorum, how is that enforced? There's a lot of really wild questions. This is why I really, really hope that they come together, because it just would not be really good for the state of Minnesota if it doesn't get resolved, or if this ends up in court. So, it is crazy. I hope that answers your question.
It does. I wasn't expecting much different. I don't think any of us have a crystal ball to figure this out.
Yeah.
Everybody's speculating, and if you talk to two different legislators,
Mhm.
you get two different answers too. So
Yeah.
I guess
I mean,
we just wait and see.
And we wait and see, honestly, it's my background is actually as a lawyer. I was a trained lawyer and I practiced law before I became a lobbyist. And, I've read a lot of this stuff on both sides of a number of these issues. And I'm like, I don't think any of it is crystal clear. And so I do believe that everyone is trying to act in good faith, but in good faith in a way that supports their position. So it's just not easy. Any other questions? Well, thank you. I appreciate, good crowd today. And we'll be doing this monthly. We'll be sending out emails. Make sure you're getting our newsletter. And that's about all I have. Joe, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, will do. Well, first of all, thank you, Elizabeth. You brought some good information to us, as usual. And thanks for everybody in attendance today. And just stay tuned for the next forum we're going to have, and have a great weekend.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Have a great weekend.